series we're doing. It's called Breaking Free, Healing for the Black Sheep of the Family.
Okay.
And it's a 5-part series. This is part 1. We're using some materials from the Fundamental Foundations Counseling Center
Gotcha.
in Little Elm, Texas.
Yeah.
And, I always find family dynamics to be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But this one really grabbed me because it takes this concept of the black sheep and it kind of turns it on its head.
It really does, yeah. Kind of makes you think about it differently.
Yeah, so instead of it being this negative thing,
Right.
it frames it more as a potential for growth and self-discovery.
Yeah.
I really like that take. It's almost as if the black sheep isn't really the problem, but more a symptom of like a bigger issue within the whole family unit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the approach we're going to take on this. What if like being the black sheep isn't about like some personal flaw or something, but just about being in a dysfunctional family?
Yeah.
This series explores the family systems theory, which basically says that everyone in a family is connected and they affect each other's behavior. So like the black sheep is kind of the one who shakes things up and shows where the problems are.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So for people who maybe aren't too familiar with the term, how would you describe a black sheep in the context of this series?
Well, usually the black sheep is the one who stands out from the rest of the family, whether it's their values, their beliefs, their lifestyle, or even just having a different viewpoint.
Right.
They're often seen as the odd one out,
Mm-hmm.
and this can lead to feelings of isolation, rejection, even guilt.
It sounds really tough, honestly.
It can be.
The material from the counseling center goes as far as to say that it can be similar to trauma
Yeah.
in how it affects mental health.
It can. There are actually studies that show chronic scapegoating, where the black sheep always gets blamed or criticized.
Mm-hmm.
It can have lasting psychological effects. Yeah. We see more anxiety, depression, even PTSD in people who've dealt with that kind of emotional abuse from their family.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder, why would families even do that?
Well, often families have a hard time facing their own dysfunction.
Right.
And the black sheep, just by being different,
Mm-hmm.
accidentally highlights those problems. So instead of dealing with it, it's easier to just focus on the person who seems to be causing the issues.
Right, so it's like the black sheep becomes a scapegoat for all the family's unresolved problems.
Exactly. And this can manifest in subtle ways, too.
Okay.
The material even points out examples where normal behaviors, like showing your emotions, setting boundaries, or trying to grow as a person, can be seen as bad or rebellious in a dysfunctional family.
It's interesting. So even trying to be your true self and improve yourself can actually just make the black sheep situation worse.
Unfortunately, that happens a lot. And it's really invalidating for the person who's just trying to be themselves, The message they get is, you're the problem, when really they're just reflecting the family's discomfort with anything that challenges the way things are.
That's rough.
It is.
It reminds me of that saying, you can't wake someone who's pretending to be asleep.
Mm-hmm.
If a family doesn't want to admit there's an issue, then anything the black sheep tries to do to change things might just be met with resistance or even hostility.
Yeah. And that brings us to one of the main points of this series. Being the black sheep doesn't actually mean there's something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
It's super important to separate how you see yourself from these potentially damaging family narratives.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It's not that you're inherently flawed or broken, but that you're trying to exist in a system that can't handle your individuality.
Right.
Yeah.
So our listeners should really try to internalize that. You're not the problem.
Exactly.
You're reacting to a problem.
Yeah. And that change in perspective is often the first step toward healing. It helps you let go of blaming yourself and see the dynamics at play a little more objectively. You start to realize the label of black sheep is coming from the outside,
Right.
from a system that might be messed up, not from something inherently wrong with you.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
But I'm sure a lot of our listeners are wondering, okay, so where do we go from here? How do we start to heal from all of this and break free?
That's what we're going to be getting into throughout this whole series.
Perfect.
The Counseling Center material gives some practical steps and strategies.
Okay.
But before we get to those, it's important to understand that healing takes time. It's not a quick fix, and it often means facing some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our families.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not about pretending the hurt isn't there.
Yeah.
It's more about leaning into it, understanding it, and then ultimately moving past it.
Absolutely. It's about realizing that you have the power to choose how you react to those past hurts. You can let them define you, or you can use them to grow and transform. And that's what we'll dig into in our next episode. We'll be looking at those emotional wounds and triggers that are often at the root of the black sheep experience.
I'm already feeling hopeful just from this initial discussion.
Yeah.
It feels good to know that there's a path forward, a
Mm-hmm.
way to break free from these unhealthy patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like this is where the real work begins, right? Like actually getting to the heart of those past hurts and understanding how they might be influencing our lives today.
Exactly. We have to get to the root cause. Otherwise, we're just putting bandages on deeper issues.
Makes sense.
The material really emphasizes that unpacking those wounds means revisiting those formative experiences in our families.
Okay, that sounds a little daunting. I mean, where do we even begin to sort through all of that?
Well, a good place to start is to think about the messages you received growing up, like about who you were supposed to be.
Mm.
What were those unspoken family expectations? Did you feel pressure to conform to a certain role?
You know what? I'm starting to see how those early messages, even the ones that weren't directly said out loud,
Yeah,
could really get stuck in our subconscious.
absolutely. Think about it. Were you expected to be the overachiever, the
Yeah.
peacemaker, the caregiver?
Hmm.
Or maybe you were always told you were too sensitive or too emotional or too different,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know?
It's almost like those labels become part of us over time, and they
Mhm.
affect how we see ourselves and how we interact with the world.
Exactly. And those internalized messages can turn into triggers later on, causing us to overreact in certain situations.
Mhm.
For example, if you were always criticized for expressing your emotions as a child, you might find yourself shutting down emotionally in your adult relationships.
Right. Or maybe you're constantly apologizing for just being yourself, always seeking approval from others.
Exactly. By recognizing those early messages, we can start to understand why we react so strongly in certain situations. We can see those patterns and realize that they might be rooted in those early family dynamics.
It's like connecting the dots between our past and our present. We're becoming detectives in our own lives.
I like that analogy. It's about recognizing those triggers, understanding where they come from, and most importantly, choosing how we respond to them.
So it's not about blaming our families, but understanding where our wounds come from so we can begin to heal them.
Exactly. Blame just keeps us trapped in a cycle of resentment and victimhood. Understanding allows us to move forward with compassion for ourselves and our families.
It's realizing that everyone is operating from their own set of experiences and limitations.
Precisely. And that compassion includes ourselves. We need to acknowledge that we were doing the best we could with the tools we had at the time.
I love that, recognizing that we're all a work in progress, even our families.
Exactly. And that's why self-compassion is so crucial in this process. Treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer a close friend.
That's easier said than done, especially when we've internalized those critical voices from our families. It's like we become our own worst enemies.
That's true. That's why it's essential to start challenging those negative messages with positive affirmations. Remind yourself that you are worthy, capable, and deserving of love and belonging.
Yeah, rewriting the script, replacing those old tapes with messages that affirm our inherent worth.
Exactly. And speaking of narratives, let's talk about some specific emotional wounds that black sheep often carry. One of the most common is a deep sense of rejection.
It's got to be tough.
Yeah, it comes from being told, either directly or indirectly, that you're not good enough, that you don't belong.
Oof, yeah, that would leave some scars.
It can. It leads to feelings of worthlessness, a fear of intimacy, and a constant need for validation from others.
It makes it hard to trust people and be vulnerable.
Absolutely. Another common wound is feeling invalidated. This is where your thoughts, feelings, and experiences are constantly dismissed or minimized, as if they don't matter.
Oh, wow, that's like being gaslighted by your own family.
Exactly. No wonder it leads to self-doubt and second-guessing yourself.
So how do we start to heal these wounds and move from pain to empowerment?
That's a great question, and we'll explore it more in depth in our next episode when we discuss setting boundaries. But for now, the important thing is to simply acknowledge the pain. Allow yourself to feel those emotions without judgment.
It's like giving ourselves permission to grieve those losses, those unmet needs, even if they're from childhood.
Exactly. And in feeling it, we often find a release, a sense of freedom. It's not about dwelling in the pain, but moving through it.
So we have to acknowledge the wound before we can heal it.
Right. And while self-compassion is key, professional support can also be really helpful. A therapist who understands the black sheep experience can give you a safe space to work through those emotions and develop healthier ways of coping.
It's like having a guide to help you navigate those rough waters. It's interesting, though, with all this talk about healing, I still feel a bit stuck in that old story of being the problem child, the one who's somehow defective.
I understand. It's hard to shake off those ingrained beliefs, especially when our families reinforce them for so long.
Right.
But remember, the black sheep isn't inherently flawed. It's the system, the family dynamic, that's often the problem.
And by choosing a different path, by stepping outside that system, we're actually showing strength and resilience.
Exactly. It takes courage to question the status quo, to challenge those ingrained family patterns. It's brave to be the one who says, this isn't working for me.
It's like the black sheep is a canary in the coal mine, warning everyone about the danger, even if they don't want to see it.
And sometimes, by leaving that toxic environment, they create space for others to follow, to question the norms they might have blindly accepted before.
So the black sheep is a pioneer, paving the way for a new way of relating within the family.
And in that act of pioneering, they reclaim their power, their voice, their right to define themselves on their own terms.
That's powerful. But what about those of us who still have to interact with our families? How do we do that without falling back into those old patterns and getting hurt again?
That's where setting boundaries comes in, and that's what we'll explore in our next episode.
Okay, great.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose how we engage with people who might trigger us and when and under what circumstances.
Right.
It's about taking control and creating healthy boundaries to protect our well-being.
This is giving me a lot to think about. I'm starting to feel a sense of hope I haven't felt before.
That's the power of understanding. It allows us to move from reacting to choosing.
And for our listeners who are ready to step into that space of choice, we'll be back next time with part 3, where we'll delve into the specifics of setting boundaries, creating those healthy limits, and ultimately reclaiming our power as the black sheep of the family. Welcome back to our deep dive into healing for the black sheep of the family. This is it, the final part of our 3-part series.
And it's a good place to wrap things up with boundaries. As we've talked about, they're really important for reclaiming your power and just protecting yourself.
Yeah, we've been discussing all those emotional wounds and triggers that black sheep often carry.
Right.
And how understanding them is like the foundation for healing.
It is.
But understanding is only one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah,
We need to take action too. And setting boundaries, well, that's a pretty powerful action we can take.
it is.
It's like drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is where my peace starts. This is what I'm okay with, and this is what I'm absolutely not okay with.
I love that. It's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the material really emphasizes that setting boundaries with family can be especially hard
Oh, I can imagine.
because there's this expectation of unconditional love and acceptance no matter what.
Right, like you're supposed to just put up with any kind of behavior because you're related.
Exactly. And for black sheep who've already felt rejected and invalidated by their families, setting boundaries can feel really risky.
Yeah, I get it.
It's like they're afraid of being pushed away even more or starting more conflict.
Right.
But here's the thing. Setting boundaries isn't about being selfish or trying to control people.
Okay.
It's about taking care of yourself. It's about honoring your own needs and protecting your well-being.
That makes sense.
So how do we actually set those boundaries, especially with family members who might not be used to us asserting ourselves?
Yeah, that's the tough part.
Well, the material suggests a few steps. First, you have to be super clear about your limits. What behaviors are you absolutely not going to tolerate anymore? What are your non-negotiables?
So basically, taking stock of your own needs and figuring out what you need to thrive.
Precisely. Once you know what those are, you have to communicate them clearly and assertively.
That's where I think a lot of people get stuck, especially if they've been taught to be people pleasers or avoid conflict.
It definitely takes practice. The material talks about using I statements, focusing on your own feelings and needs.
So instead of saying, you're always putting me down, you would say, I feel hurt and disrespected when you criticize my choices.
Exactly. You're taking ownership of your experience without blaming or attacking the other person.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about when family members push back or try to guilt trip you into giving in?
The material acknowledges that that's a pretty normal reaction, especially if your family isn't used to you setting boundaries.
Right, like you're messing with the family's balance.
Yeah, but it's important to remember that you have the right to protect yourself, even if it means disappointing others or causing some temporary discomfort.
And sometimes those boundaries might mean limiting contact with certain family members, declining invitations, or even just walking away from conversations that are getting toxic.
Exactly. You have to put your well-being first, even if it means making tough decisions.
But what about those feelings of guilt and obligation that often come with family? Those can be really hard to deal with.
The material talks about reframing the whole idea of family loyalty. True loyalty isn't about blindly following expectations that are hurting you.
So it's about honoring your own truth and knowing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself.
Precisely. And by setting those healthy boundaries, you're not just taking care of yourself, you're also modeling healthy behavior for others, especially younger generations.
You're showing them that it's okay to prioritize their needs and that they don't have to tolerate disrespect or mistreatment.
And that can have a ripple effect. Setting boundaries isn't just about you, it's about creating a healthier dynamic for everyone involved.
It's about shifting the family system toward more respect, understanding, and authenticity. And while it might not be easy, the rewards are huge.
They are.
You reclaimed your power, your voice, and your right to live a life that feels true to you.
Absolutely. It's empowering.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
I agree.
And I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure.
And to all the black sheep out there listening, remember, you are not alone.
You are not.
You are strong, you are resilient, and you are worthy of love and belonging both in your family and outside of it.
Yes, you are.
And as you start this journey of healing and setting boundaries, keep in mind, what was once seen as a mark of difference, that black sheep label, might actually be your greatest strength.
Absolutely.
It's what makes you unique. It lets you see the world differently, challenge the norm, and create a life that's authentic and fulfilling.
Yeah, that's a gift.
So embrace your inner black sheep. It might just be the key to unlocking your greatest potential.
Couldn't agree more.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into healing for the black sheep of the family. Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep embracing your unique and wonderful selves.
Take control of your mental health with our membership program. Enjoy priority scheduling, session rollovers, and in-office and virtual appointments when you need them. Fundamental Foundations Counseling Center offers affordable plans tailored to your needs because your wellness matters. Visit fundamentalfoundcounseling.com to join today.